Hello and welcome to another episode of Conversations with Claire on IDAGIO Live, where classical music happens. Today's episode is a very special one for me personally because we're speaking a little bit about a novelty subject which I feel a lot of musicians could do better with knowing more about. We're going to speak about percussion and the art of a singing percussive instrument. And I have here with me today two percussionists, two great colleagues of mine, Edzard Locher and Pius Cheung. Thank you so much for joining me today on IDAGIO Live. I'm just going to say a little bit about each of them, and if you have anything to add, please do. So Edzard is a percussionist from Germany. He's a teacher in the Wiesbaden Musik Academy, and he's also the solo percussionist of the Hessische Staatstheater in Wiesbaden, and also has a marimba quartet called the Wooden Anvil. And Pius, we actually went to school together many years ago. It's amazing to think about. We met in Philadelphia in the Curtis Institute of Music. And from there, I think, Pius, you were studying in Boston, in Michigan, and now teaching in the University of Oregon and also performing and composing. So if I've missed anything, please feel free to add something.
Edzard?
Well, Claire, thanks for having me. Thanks for having us. Greetings to Pius, to you. Well, there's not that much about me to add. I think you pretty much said everything that maybe on my CV so far. Well, it's not called the solo percussionist. The actual term in English is the principal percussionist, but I think you meant quite the same thing.
I did, yes. Nice.
Oh, great. Well, thanks for having me also. It was great meeting Edzard last week. You know, we talked, and then it's great to meet people across the continent over COVID time. And greetings from Eugene, Oregon. It's very Edzard, you're in Switzerland right now, right?
I am, yes. I'm sitting in my sister-in-law's house. Behind me is the river going. We have quite a bad weather and quite brown and spread up, but you can't see it. I took the shot on the leaf, so it's very beautiful.
Wow.
Beautiful.
So someone is in Zurich, Edzard is in Zurich, and Pius, you said that you're in Oregon, so you're really on the West Coast. So we're all kind of spaced out a bit, time difference wise. Yeah. So how have things been going during the Corona times for both of you? The last couple weeks, months. I mean, it feels like not much time has passed. And if you look at it, it's already been almost half a year.
It's surprisingly busy for me, actually. So right now, just now you talked a little bit about my CV. So right now I'm I'm splitting between three things. I'm playing, I'm teaching, and I'm also composing. So obviously the playing is a little slow now, but you know, everyone has self-discipline, so I'm like working on different things on myself. But was it 2 weeks ago? Maybe last week. We just finished my online summer seminar for 2 weeks. So it's been every day at least 5-6 hours of Zoom time with like 30 students from across the country, from around the world actually. There were some from Venezuela, Mexico, China, and everything. So we did that, and some of my compositions deadlines was postponed. That was actually kind of nice for me because I was running behind. But you know, some premieres was also delayed too, so that was unfortunate. But you know, what are you gonna do? You just keep moving on to next projects.
But that's really interesting. I mean, you're both teaching, and for me, it's also intriguing to hear how it goes with online teaching because I've dabbled in it, and I see that it works better or worse for certain people and maybe for certain instruments. And you mentioned you work with Zoom, and I think Edzard, you've also done a few lessons also online. How has that been actually sound quality wise? And do you think it's actually a good alternative for presence teaching, let's say, because I think we're headed into now the start of a next semester, which is a bit unsure if it's going to be face-to-face or online.
Edzard, do you have any thoughts?
I always see kind of a danger in trying to put whatever would be a cultural Aussage, like whatever you do as a kind of entertainment culturally, to put that on a digital space, as we're kind of digging our own graves, getting away from the live performance. Which is why I'm not that much a fan of like live streaming music, or even recording CDs or DVDs. I think live is still, to me, the best thing there is. It's the most unbedingt, like if there's no interception.
Yes, it's the most direct, let's say. Yeah.
But I learned, and I was forced to learn, like we all were, that teaching via whatever platform you use to transmit video and audio is way easier than I thought. I would have deemed teaching via, for instance, Skype or Zoom impossible. Yeah. But quite the contrary is the fact. For us, with percussion, we have the big advantage, I think, over anyone. Mostly, for instance, singers who cannot even see what's going on inside of themselves. We have very much motion going on when making our music. Of course, okay, so it's more when someone takes up his violin, you can tell whether he's done this for the last 20 years or he's a beginner. But in percussion, this goes to an even bigger extent. You can very much see someone's style, and even to pre-estimate what's going to come out of what he's doing the moment he does. I think this is, for us as percussionists, the most simple thing to do, which is why
you're saying
video is for us a little easier in terms of that.
Okay. Yeah, because that's a big advantage. I think in terms of sound quality for piano, or like you said, for singers, sometimes the online platforms isn't ideal. But if you're able to tell a lot just from the visual contact, then of course that's absolutely an advantage. Did you also feel the same way about that, Pius, when you were doing your online teachings?
Not similar, but not totally. Well, first, to follow an Edzard's live performance thing, I'm not as scared as the YouTube thing. Actually, I can't tell you how many times people come up to me after a concert. I'm like, I came to this concert because I saw you on YouTube. I mean, so that's an advantage. I mean,
I've never had that.
Entire concerts, right?
But maybe that's a difference. That there is a difference between what happens in America and what happens in Europe. I must say, like, I do think social media maybe plays a bigger role still of what happens in the US, because I mean, of course, there are a lot of people in Europe. Of course, we all use Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, but I don't know. It's never happened to me that people come up to me and say like, I saw you on social media and I was interested to come to a concert. That's very interesting. But maybe it's also like specifically the niche of what you're presenting, you know?
I think that has a big part of it. I mean, I'm playing marimba, so it's like people are just going, what is this thing? I mean, it's still kind of novel, I mean, compared to piano, but
it is.
But, you know, of course, a lot of my audience are also percussionists as well. So a lot of them, I grew up watching you on YouTube. Then they say I grew up watching on YouTube. That, you know how much that hurts?
Yeah,
that literally just translates to you're old. I'm like,
yeah, right.
I guess I am. Yeah, I watched you in high school. But anyway, so on to the Zoom teaching thing. For me, the sound quality is a big problem. So I'm encouraging all my students to get microphones, like external microphones, other than just computer microphones. And they're not that expensive. Like, you can get decent ones for like $50 USB mics. So I'm telling them to pretty much, I mean, some of them still don't, but you know, what can you do about it? But Edzard said the motion can tell some, it can't tell all. So last term, we have sort of rebalanced our teaching to a little bit more on the academic side. So versus, you know, in previous years would be like, I don't know, the whole lesson would be playing. Right now might be like half playing, half an analysis and talk about the music, and I'll be giving more lectures than usual. And I actually, I freaked my students out with the first 2 weeks of remote teaching. I didn't know what to do. So I started giving 2-hour lectures on like Boulez, and then another 2 hours on like Xenakis. And then, so I started like analyzing tone rows with my freshman students. They're 17-year-olds that don't know 1-4-5-1 yet. And at some point during the second week, I saw all their eyes just went like,
Yeah.
and I did not take
Glazed
any notes.
over.
I just kept going. Like here, so here's this tone row here, like translated here. This is the transposition, and they just all went crazy. So by the end of the second week, they all wrote me an email, like a studio email, saying, "Professor, this is just too much. Can we have less?" So
I
at
see.
that point, that was actually easy for me because 2 hour lecture takes me 10 hours to prepare.
Of course. Yeah, for sure.
So that was like, okay, fine. And then various things we can do, like, Edzard, living room music, of course, John Cage.
Wait, come again?
I assume living room music
I didn't
by John Cage.
get that transitions. How would you end up with John Cage and living room music?
Because we did that in class.
You did that via Skype.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so things we can do easily over Zoom, and they're actually. Speaking of which, did you know there are music we can play over Zoom?
No. Well,
No.
I know about several attempts, but I haven't once witnessed an attempt that actually worked. I mean, whatever I saw on people trying to make music across the internet, it's either pretty much a giant challenge, and you can do it if you have like a different team of another 3 to 4 people working it out, or it's going to be an entertaining attempt. And it's going to stay an attempt, in my opinion, what I heard so far, what I witnessed on the internet so far. So
there's some music out there. Mainly, there's one by a friend of ours called, his name is Dai Fujikura. He wrote a piece called Longing from Afar. That's designed for telecommunication playing. So we could be playing together at the same time. It's open score, free instrumentation. And of course, it's not like synced to a beat or anything. And then he would just give a cue, and then there's various instructions for like 7 sections or something. That's pretty cool. That's an idea he came up with. Yeah, and I have a couple. You wouldn't happen to have performed it already. There's a lot of performances out there already. So I'll have to look that up on YouTube, right? Yeah, Longing from Afar. And I actually also have 2 pieces that's designed for like we can play remotely. It won't be over Zoom, but like there are 2 of them. One is called Synced. That of course, I was thinking like how can we play together, like record together. The first one is an obvious solution of using a click track, of course. That's called Synced. And then Unsynced. It's a follow-up movement of how do we play together without being played together. So I built into the music that we don't have to be together. Everyone plays from the same part. And then it's kind of like open instrumentation as well, like a 4-voice chorale, and then you can pick your own voice or play all 4. But then the creativity is in how people could line up while not being aligned. So they'll be playing the same part, you can kind of hear the same thing, but then they will pop up at like different times.
But Pius, did you develop these ideas during the COVID times, or was this already an idea that you had before? So during?
God, no, of course not.
I don't know. Maybe you really saw ahead in the future. It sounds very interesting. You've tried it out already.
It was because we had the summer seminar. So we wanted something for the students to play together while being not together. So we found the Longing from Afar, and I also wrote those 2 pieces for the seminar.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
So, and what part of this performance you would witness as an audience would depend on which side of the screen you are, or whether you're just like watching that streaming of 2 persons at the same time. So it could always depend on what's happening, what's coming next, right?
So we can't actually watch it live on Zoom because Zoom's audio quality is not good enough. We're recording what's happening, and then we're putting together at the end. So, I mean, it's still not like, okay, we're going to a concert hall and then we're sitting down and listen. It's still not ideal, but I think that's probably the best outcome out of this. Well, it sounds strangely entertaining. This might be really fun, and I think as long as you're putting the effort in it, I think the musical side could be very, very fascinating too. I mean, it's not like you're filming yourself while doing the dishes or something. You're actually making music together. I'll have to look that up. I'll find it, right? I actually just uploaded synced and unsynced on YouTube, so you can Google it.
Perfect. Let's Google that.
And Longing from Afar, there's just like, I don't know, by now I think 10 recordings from like orchestras and choirs and the percussion ensemble, of course.
What I wanted to come back to was what you said about the insufficient audio quality for teaching via Skype. The funny thing I noticed for me is that, of course, the sound is corrupted. The audio isn't like in a way pleasant or near to what would have been heard if you had been there actually and live. But I think I still can tell through that, however changed audio, whether what happened there would have been what I liked or not. I mean, you can hear the way your student strokes the bar, whether it. I think you know what I mean.
Yeah. Of course, you can tell some. And of course, there are like various Zoom settings you can trick into like sounding okay. I don't know if you knew that, but we can save that for like after this thing. We can just talk privately.
Well, I mean, it's tell me now. I mean, if it's not.
Oh,
Maybe
no,
it's something that other people want to like also learn for like
really?
music
Well,
teachers who
so
are struggling.
you can go to the audio setting and then disable the background noises, the persistent. So Zoom automatically disable background noises. I mean compressed background noises. So we have to disable that, and we have to enable the original sound on the audio setting, so it doesn't actually make everything into this dynamic. Because
Interesting.
usually with percussion, like fortes and pianos are gone.
Yeah, true.
Well,
Yeah. So far it's been working out pretty well with those tricks.
Right.
the other thing is that you do not have to be in the same place anyway. A student of mine, he's in Wiesbaden at the moment, and I'm in Zurich, but he's preparing for an audition. So, well, I could either have told him, all right, get on the train, 5 hours, see you there. Or I could just have told him, you know what, I trust you. Let's have this via Skype in my case. I won't be there. I won't have to be there to help you like every step, but we'll just do a quick roundup. And if there's something absolutely that I would not be happy with, then I can tell you.
Right.
Well, in the end, I do think in the future, this whole much more online digitalized teaching, it will help in the long run, because it's definitely not a 100% alternative to presence teaching, but it opens up the doors for much more convenient times, and teachers can just like reach out to students much easier in a way. I remember when I was a student in Germany, when I was 17 or so, calling the teacher up at home, it seemed a little too private, almost like you didn't want to disturb. But nowadays, I think, teachers would get up and then they would be having their lectures just directly from their living rooms. It makes everything a bit more relaxed, a little bit more casual. I even remember when I was in a competition in 2010, it was in Brussels, and my teacher said to me, like, yeah, look, can we talk a little bit on Skype? And I said, oh, the place I'm staying doesn't have internet. And so then he ended up calling me, and so via telephone, which is even worse, of course. And he asked me just to play the beginnings of every single piece. So I would just play it, so he would kind of get the impression of like the tempo, and then he would just give me very, very broad points, of course. But even that little thing at the time, it meant a lot to me. And I remember taking those little 5-minute telephone lessons with utmost importance. So I think it could be definitely a way to look into the future.
Which teacher are you speaking of?
I'm speaking about Ari Vardi. This is the teacher in Germany that I went to in 2007.
All right. That's a very good teacher.
Not the ones in Curtis. I think in Curtis the piano faculty were all almost over 80, so can't really imagine them going on the online stuff. But nowadays, I guess they do. But great, going into next topics, I would love to hear, Edzard, about how it's been for you with your orchestra. So like we said, that you are the percussionist in Wiesbaden Orchestra, and how has the orchestra coped with this whole situation? I know for a fact that they were actually the first theater to start live concerts again, and they made many headlines, I think. I even read about it in various papers here in the States, as they were the first ones.
Well, we were. depending on what you want to name the first again. Well, the most interesting, I think the most like most worthy of a story was how we stopped performing. You get to imagine the opera business, and you're going to the building night per night, and every night, and you perform. And every night we would say, all right, this is the last performance tonight. See you guys in another lifetime. Or, well, now it's the intermission. We're not going to head on for the second part of the performance, are we?
So it was so extreme. Okay.
So we kept saying goodbye night after night. No, they're not going to allow us to perform tomorrow anymore. And this kept going, and we even played our last performance of Anna Nicole, an awesome opera by Anthony Turnage. And I did one last performance of Histoire du Soldat. And after that, they shut the whole place down. And like everyone, we were hit in an instant. We saw it kind of coming, but no one would really believe that all of a sudden it's just not working anymore. People started panicking, grabbing their instruments so they would have some chance of to keep practicing, getting their music, getting whatever they would have to, they would have, because usually we used to practice in the building.
Theater.
And me and Pius as a percussionist, I mean, I cannot practice in my flat. If I did that, the landlord would show up and throw me out any second later. I have to practice there. And then they just shut down the performances, and immediately everybody started scrambling up what could happen next, because of course we're unterstützt, like we're supported by the land, by the city, by the Bund, by the Republic, everything, and we are in a very comfortable situation employment-wise. But we can't just go and say, all right, people, we're going on a vacation. See you next year. That's not how it works. So everyone got together and found out how to keep up the work, and not just leaving our audience down or anyone. And it was it's not a coincidence. It happens every year. But the time the shutdown came, we already had planned out the Maifestspiele, which is the festival that's going on in May in Wiesbaden, which is quite a unique thing for an opera to do, because normally this would be a festival like from a city or from a country or whatever. This is an opera-centered festival, and we managed to reuse and reimburse a lot of that. Reimburse isn't the right word. It's to reuse. Right? Recycle. That's pretty much it. We made it recycling a lot of that scheduled program, which allowed us to come up as this first opera in the Republic with an unique, extremely high quality program. We had like stars from all around the world coming and performing their operas in a kind of frozen setting on stage with a piano instead of the orchestra. So that's just for you to know what you may have read in the New York Times and of us reopening again. Of course, we did not just do the common opera performances. It was a very abgespeckt, like a really condensed version of what had been planned before. And that there were so good plans already ahead allowed us to start off that early again. And I think many other houses then followed up.
Yeah. Wow. And then it went quite gradually, right? You went from like these kind of Liederabends, so song recitals with one single piano, into more chamber settings of the orchestra, and then finally like smaller, let's say chamber orchestra settings, maybe like 40, 50 people on the stage. It's all about the distancing. I think that was the main point.
Yes, they had told us, all right, there's a distance you have to keep, like singers 6 meters away from the stage. You may not enter the pit. And so what started off again was like the lowest version. There is 3 people on stage, one pianist, 2 singers, they're singing the opera. All right. And then you drain the audience down to 100 people of usually 1100. and that was the maximum safety version there was. And when these restrictions were being kassiert, like they were being pulled out again, everyone started finding a way, how can we cope and still keep these restrictions, but also get as many people as possible back into work. And that ended up, as you said it, with chamber music productions. My season there in July ended with like Lied von der Erde. There's a magnificent rendition of that from Arnold Schoenberg, who condensed the thing down to 15 musicians. That's like the biggest thing we were allowed to then. And into this 15 people chamber music, the thing from the Liederabende grew over the 4 months we had. 3 months. March, April, May.
Well, right? Let's keep fingers crossed that it keeps on going as it's going, like with progress in Germany, and for the next season to be able to start off as smoothly as possible. Now, I have a question about the beginnings of what made you decide to become a percussionist. I think this is a very interesting topic for me personally, because I was going to a regular elementary school in the US, and there we were able to select if we wanted to join the chorus, so singing, or join the string orchestra, or join the band. And I was very sad because I had picked up piano maybe 1 year or 2 years before the kids were given this decision to pick an instrument and start taking classes with friends, with classmates. And for me, it almost didn't make sense because I was already taking piano, but I thought it just seemed so fun to do everything as a group. But I found the percussionists, like the students who wanted to become drummers, they always had in their minds, like, we're going to become a rock star someday. We're going to join hip hop band or something, become one of the members of a leading band group. And I think, is that also how it started with both of you, or was it a little different? So Pius, you wanted to be a rock star?
Sure, of course. I mean, very typical. Actually, I started on piano, of course, like any good Asian boy. And then,
yeah.
I mean, that's just a given. And
that's
then,
just a given, right?
Yeah. And then I wanted to be a rock drummer because that was cool, right? And then I started playing drums, and then by coincidence, my best friend at school at the time, he was a violin student, and then he was studying at the Hong Kong Academy of Performing Arts. I think that's what it's called. And then he went to audition, and he dragged me along. So I went and I auditioned on percussion. I mean, I don't know what percussion was, so I went there. I think it was the horn teacher that auditioned me, and then she just told me to hit stuff. So I started banging on her piano and chairs and stuff. And my mom was like, no, 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 no. But I just kept banging, and she was like, yeah, no, let him. And then I got in, my friend got rejected, and that was the beginning of my percussion learning curve. And then, of course, in the beginning, I hated the keyboard stuff. That was just terrible. That was not cool. That was like the nerdiest thing out of the percussion family. I'm like, I don't want to play this. I want to play drums. And then eventually I grew to like it. And then eventually I got to be natural at it, and then kept going with it until now.
Wow.
But Edzard.
But I'm sure the piano has definitely also influenced a little bit of how you were trained also as a percussionist, because in the end, of course, as a trained pianist, we always were taught to sing on our instrument, even though it's a percussive instrument. That really becomes, I think, the core of what we try to do. We try to imitate different instruments. We try to imitate strings. We try to imitate the human voice. And I guess also in some ways, the marimba is like the piano in the percussion family.
I mean, I use that style of teaching and thinking a lot too. That's, I guess, maybe a little bit more unusual for American style percussion teaching, which is more like technique central. I'm like telling my students, can you play this part like a flute? And then they'll be playing like a triangle. And then, half of them, they're confused, but the other half that gets it, they'll be like, oh yeah, I got it. So, and then it's a balance of, what kind of instructions to give.
Oh, that's really interesting. We'll hold on to that, but yeah, Edzard?
I find it interesting that Pius, that you're saying this so honestly, because that what you just said about this difference between like technical and musical approach to what you're doing as a musician is quite the feeling that we in Europe may have toward the US. So
I know.
well, thanks for that.
No, I have a lot of very good friends in Europe, and we talked about it. I'm like, why are Americans always like talking so much in lessons, or like why are they just talking about like 3 inches to 6 inches or something? And for me, I think we need a balance.
So there is a real, I wanted to ask that also as the next question. Is there a difference in the schools of percussion playing, particularly between USA and Germany? And maybe also, I don't know, Pius, if you also studied in Hong Kong a little bit, if there are differences for that, because I do see there are certainly these two schools in piano playing. And that was actually the main reason why I went from America after Curtis to go to Germany, because I had felt I had learned enough of the technical basis and I wanted to see what else was there. And turned out there was like a huge world out there that I hadn't discovered yet.
I mean, so I could take it away first. So, in a very, very, very broad and generalized sense, of course, at least my impression is like European, they'll be like thinking more music based. They may made less about technique based. I mean, a very, very generalized sense. And then in America, it might be like technique first, uh, and then the music comes second. They might not use as much like descriptive terms or like play this like a love song or something. And then in another very generalized sense, in Asia, they'll be more instructing than guidance. Like they'll be telling how you should play exactly. And then, of course, there's the same applies to percussion as in the piano world. You get like 10-year-olds playing repertoire that are just like light years ahead of their age, but then technically they can do it perfectly. But if you ask them anything about the music, they're like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
And they can't sight read at all, of course. But I'm speaking only very generalized, of course. I mean, there's a lot of creative people in the US that's, thinking about deeply into the arts, not just about technique and vice versa. There's people in Europe that knows way more about technique than I do, and then
Yeah.
but also cares about the music as well.
Well, but I can absolutely follow that generalization. I would not take that even as an offense. I think it's pretty much the cliche we're growing up in. Me as a percussionist in an orchestra, I can tell you there are like physical differences. Maybe the most poking is that like generally only in the German speaking part, like Austria, Switzerland, and Germany, in those countries, we set our timpani, the biggest one, to the right, and then we go counterclockwise to the left. Our smallest timpano is at the left. And everywhere else, even if you go to France, like you just cross the border, everyone puts their timpani the other way around. So now,
did you know that, Claire?
Nope, I'm learning.
Oh yeah.
Now the philosophy behind that is not like an approach because like the roadie of your orchestra just puts them like then every time, but there are arguments for both sides, and I think seeing these arguments may help characterize the approach that these different styles of playing have, because I call it American style. It's the American way. Like you go from the left, which is the biggest timpani, to the right. They say, all right, we set up our timpani the way the keyboard is set, as you do have your lowest keys on the left too, right, Claire? And everything going from left to right. The marimba, everywhere, even in Germany, in the world, everywhere, in the xylophone, all these instruments go from left to right. So why would Germans choose to go the other way around if everyone's used to having the left as the low note? Because if you look at general, like at standard timpani literature, which is played in the orchestra, you usually have like two notes, a quad from each other, bam, bam. Like the usual thing is A and D, right? So now you have the dominante, the A, in the right hand, which usually tends to be the strong hands with people. So usually when you go di, 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 and then you go for the dominante in A, you can use your stronger arm to play the more important note. That's the argument people are having. Why would they do this? So the phrasing changes if you play from left to right or from right to left.
And actually, I also know that theoretically, I think that's like makes much more sense to have bigger drums on the right, because the bigger the drum are, the harder you have to hit it, to get it to sound. So I'll use my strong hand. I mean, but of course I grew up with the left is low, so that's what I grew up with. But I totally
So
understand
it's a little bit different. If you were to come to Germany to perform in orchestra and vice versa, Edzard, you would have to readjust the way that you perform, or would you be able to kind of stick to the way you were trained?
I don't think I'll be hired at all. But if I was hired, but probably, yeah. The conductor would probably look at me like, "What? Your drums are backwards. What are you doing?" But
Oh, it's
the
that different.
interesting thing about this discussion is that you can see the different approaches. While in my opinion, what I feel, the American way is always the approach, let's go for the maximum and do it the best possible way. And in Germany, it's always, all right, this is what we got. Let's some kind of cope with what's going on. So while in America, you would just buy another set of timpani or buy a new mallet, in Germany, you would go and say, all right, let's make the best of what we got. In the DDR, there was this phrase called den Mangel verwahren, like verwalten, den Mangel verwalten, like all we do is just cope with the lack. That's these two different approaches. I think the timpani one is a quite good example for that.
This one tidbit that Claire, you had no idea about, but about 15 years ago or something, at the New York Philharmonic. The New York Philharmonic has long history of like New York style timpani playing, and then they ended up hiring a good friend of ours, Marcus Roten, who's completely German style playing, and then he came and just when the percussion was like, oh my God, what's gonna happen to the long tradition of like, but he sounds great, so and the orchestra sounds better now. So that's what it is.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I specifically wanted to ask about that because there are moments where you read sometimes where a very well-known European, let's say woodwind player, an oboist or so, gets hired into a huge American orchestra. And there are people definitely asking, like, is this going to change the sound of the orchestra? Like, how can he fit in? And more times than others, it works out very well. So I guess globalization. So there are still two important topics I'd like to cover, but we're a little bit short on time, so I will try to go through them pretty quickly. I wanted to ask about the physical requirements of performing percussion. It seems to me that it's more physical than other instruments. There's a lot of people who would have to ask, like, yeah, how do you stay fit as a pianist? Do you work out or anything? Not really, we play our instruments and we really kind of only work out maybe the arms, the fingers, sure. Maybe a little bit of the back, but in order to stay overall fit, you still have to do other things. But percussion, it seems like it's a very well-rounded, I mean, there's just so many different instruments that when we say percussion, that's a very broad term. And how does one avoid injuries and how does one kind of stay fit to play?
Exercise. I actually do have Pilates as part of my percussion curriculum. I mean, I don't teach it. I asked a Pilates teacher to come in and teach it. And I personally work out quite a bit.
Wow.
CrossFit, running, and all that good stuff. But more importantly, it's about posture.
Okay. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean,
that's what I wanted to ask, the posture, because also as a pianist, we have a tendency after a while to like curl into our instruments. And I guess for a marimba player, you're standing most of the time. And it's also a little bit, if you're tall and you have to bend over, it's also not good for posture.
Well, actually, I'm weird, so I play sitting down, but most people play sitting. And I've actually, I can demonstrate, right? I have one very good trick about posture that my Pilates teacher told me. You just stand up. Let's see. Stand up and then turn your hand this way outwards. So it's kind of like this. And it automatically, when you're standing in line or something, you just stand up and then turn your hand out. That automatically fixes your posture and like kind of causes you to like stand up straight and your shoulder blades together. That's just brilliant.
I can feel that.
Yeah, very small thing. And
So when you're at rest and you're standing, you just kind of like turn your hands out rather than having them faced in or sideways. Yeah, I just kind of felt that. I'm sitting, but I even felt that.
Yeah.
It does make your shoulder blades kind of more open. Interesting.
Open it up.
Yeah. And Edzard, what about you?
I mean, the risk of getting tense at whatever job you're doing, whether it's playing an instrument or even sitting at the computer, it's always there, right? If you are not disciplined enough to grab your posture and to relax the muscles that are not in use. I mean, that's the muscle that hurts. You never have problems with the muscles you use. Those muscles that start hurting and handicapping you, those will be the muscles you don't use while you do it. All otherwise, I think percussion is like the most healthy instrument you can play at all, because in the orchestra, of course, but I mean, you as a soloist, Pius, you know that too. You would sit down at an instrument, you would stand up for a different one. You would keep walking up and down on your instrument. Your hand posture is always different. It's always something different. There are guys that play the marimba like this. You can also play it like this. There are people who are using this technique for the vibraphone and then this one for drums. And then you go ahead and you have a tambourine. Whatever's happening, not even your hands will be strictly committed to one simple posture. So I think those problems that, for instance, violinists get, that's not that much for us. I think that our organ most at danger is, of course, the ears. Because if you do not protect your ears and you have a weapon-grade instrument in your hand, you can easily just smack your ears. Me, I did that. I started off as a rock drummer. I had a rock band, and I wouldn't protect my ears, and I think I lost quite a bit of my hearing.
It'll come back. Don't worry.
Well, it will come back, but I also think maybe some of that is still gone. If you, for instance, you play the glockenspiel, these are these tiny metal plates, and you hit them with another metal brass mallet. And I would be practicing, and someone from the orchestra would come in to my room and just ask for whatever, a coffee, and I would just hit it the absolutely normal force, and he would go protect his ears. And I said, "Are you crazy? What's going on?" I wouldn't even hear that. So I think this part of my hearing is already burned away. So,
okay, I hate to interrupt, but we only have.
I'm not saying this now, right?
Yes, we only have 3 minutes. Therefore, I'd like to give Pius and Edzard both a chance to speak a little bit about their composition activities. This is actually something which I'd hope we'd have a little bit more time to talk about. But as we don't, I'll just let both of you go at it. We have 3 minutes.
Sure. Well, I talked a little bit about it, but maybe this ties into a COVID story.
You transpose a lot, yeah.
But no, I'm COVID story. So I was about to premiere a ballet I wrote for percussion ensemble and like, I don't know, 30 dancers or something. And then as the premiere date's approaching and then the news of COVID is slowly rising, I'm like, is it going to happen? Is it going to happen? And then we also started talking about like a hybrid performance when all right, so the dancers are supposed to pile on top of each other for like 30 minutes or something. So how can we piling with like separating people? So things like these two people are couples, so they can touch each other, but they don't live together, so they can't touch each other. And then we started talking about like hanging the marimba on the ceiling or something. And then, but in the end, of course, that was postponed, and then got canceled in the end. And then, so we're looking at like 2022 right now. But that was a huge project we've been working on for like a whole year, talking about choreography and everything. So it's called Heaven and Earth. So imagine this whole Chinese legend, the creationism kind of thing, like fog and everything.
Okay, we'll have to keep that in mind. Yeah.
Yeah. 2 years later.
2 years later, 2022. Okay.
Edzard?
Well, it's not called quarantine, like I had to stay at home quite a lot. And I did write a little too. I had a big sonata that I wrote for solo marimba, as I thought, well, if I would be forced to be on my own in the marimba forever, as no one is allowed to perform with me, I went to writing a solo piece, and that's how that sonata came. I think once when we started off planning this conversation, we would even have in mind to present it here. I would have been proud to do so, but maybe this is a time coming for some different conversation then.
Yes, we will have to follow this up because I'm getting notice that we have to sign off. This was a very, very interesting conversation. Thank you so much for joining me, Pius, and thank you for joining me, Edzard, from Oregon and from Zurich. And I'm really looking forward. Hopefully we'll be able to all meet in reality very soon and work on projects together. This is really interesting. Thank you. And thank you for tuning in to IDAGIO Live, where